whatever, all that stuff. I don't really care. I'm hoping some people see this because I enjoy it. So anyhow, my name's Ray, and I just launched this YouTube channel just kind of for fun. I put some of my business stuff on here. I put some, sports reaction videos, which I'm not that great at. And I'm new to this, so I'll start getting better with the content and the visuals that come onto the screen. This I have done kind of in a slideshow manner. But what we're talking about today here is UFOs, aliens, and some of the evidence that I've uncovered with hundreds of hours of research actually that I put into between watching, reading, and some of the best overall reputable, credible sources. I've found some of the things that are embellished, some people who I can kind of rule out and think that they are telling stories for attention. There's a lot of gray area, obviously, no pun with little gray men, but there's a gray area with this topic. And I guess what it comes back to, it's always intrigued me. I believe I saw a UFO when I was about 10 or 11. The only time in my life, it was me and my cousin camping out in my front yard in Massachusetts. And we had binoculars outside. It was dark, and an object with diamond-shaped 4 lights in the shape of a diamond with one bright light of a different color in the middle. It was 4 red lights on the outside, 1 bright white light in the middle, and it's going through the sky. And what the hell is that thing? That ain't no plane. And I give it to my cousin to look, and he sees it. He's like, yeah. He's like, that's not, it's unidentified. Okay. And then it goes behind this big maple tree in the front yard. So we run across the maple tree, and we look up, and the thing just, within 1 second, it was out of the sky. Like nothing can do that. But regardless, I've always just been intrigued. And I don't know if you can see here, I have pages and pages of notes. I've only put some into the slideshow, and we're going to call this part 1. And, hopefully it's good. If not, oh well. It's still fun for me regardless. So I'm calling this Project Evidence. This is overwhelming evidence into the UFO or alien phenomenon. We'll examine encounters, experiences, and we're going to kind of go over the 4 types or kinds of encounters, right? Which takes us to the next slide. Sorry, I went 2 slides. There's 4 different types of close encounters that occur, right? Close encounters of the first kind. This is as simple as a sighting of a UFO. That's what I just described to you. I said I had seen back 30 years ago, 30 plus years ago. Close encounter of the second kind is where physical remains or a displacement occurs. So burnt brushes, crop circles, physical evidence, data. There's instances where, like, they say a UFO takes off, and with the propulsion, which we're not quite sure what powers these things, right? But it's some kind of propulsion unit, and it's something that is not spitting out something out the back to propel you forward, like everything we create, a rocket or an airplane. It's spitting out fumes and gas and fuels and power out the back from the way we power it to propel us forward. With UFOs, it's said to have some kind of propulsion unit to power and make it move in the manner it does, that we are not anywhere technically ready to crack how that's done, and Lord only knows. But one of the things they say is sand, can turn to glass in those cases. Close encounter the third time is when you have seen a non-human form or alien. And fourth kind is when you have been taken, an abduction, right? So let's just think, out of all the instances I'm going to go over, if only one of these is true, then all of a sudden everything else changes and the possibilities become endless, right? In terms of how many of these other reports and cases are also true. So, I think you can use a similar analogy with like ghosts, right? Paranormal. Like if one ghost sighting is true, is accurate, is fact, is real, well, then how can you discount any others? Same with UFO sightings. And of course, now there has been millions of documented sighting, mostly craft. I'm talking a majority of craft. Of course, people document being abducted, and they have stories about that, and they document possibly seeing a being. That's much less likely than the reports of seeing an actual craft. But I'm confident in saying there's enough research, encounters, experience, facts, testimony, and most importantly, credible accounts and verification in this presentation to prove that this is actually true. And more so, being tracked weekly by our own government in terms of activity and data. Yes, it's that prevalent. So more so lately, the government has actually come out and been more forthright with this stuff for, I want to say, until roughly, might have been in the Obama administration, but I know in 2018, they really came out saying that these cases are happening. We don't know what they are, and they're legit. For many, many, many years, and many aspects of the government, they're still going to say, no, that's crazy. We have nothing. We have no evidence. We have no sightings. We have no reports, blah, blah, blah. I mean, if you go back to my notes, 1952, I want to say it was. Yeah, that's when Project Blue Book starts. We're not going to talk about that. That's not really in today's curriculum and what I'm going to go over. But Blue Book is certainly awesome. Dr. Alan Hynek, who founded that, who was one of the founders. He was the scientist put on it. And then there was a guy from the military. I want to say his name. It might be, I don't know if my notes are right there. I forget the other guy off the top of my head. The TV show is excellent too. It really goes over some of the real cases. Of course, it's embellished and it's made for TV, but it's really cool. Project Blue Book. If you don't know much about it, look it up. But that was where the government really started getting involved. Now, let's start with some reputable and honorable men. This is a quote from John McCormick, who was the Speaker of the House, right? I feel that the Air Force has not been giving out all the available information on these UFOs. You cannot disregard so many unimpeachable sources, meaning, people that have no reason to make this up. If anything, it's only going to deteriorate and hurt their lives and their living. And reputation. So then we got Gordon Cooper, who was an astronaut, and I believe these ET vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets, which obviously are a little more technically advanced than we are here on Earth. Couldn't have said it much better, Gordon. Gerald Ford, ex-president. I believe the American people are entitled to a more thorough explanation than has been given to them by the Air Force. I think we owe it to the public to establish credibility regarding UFOs and to produce the, I don't know why the screenshot is so crappy, produce the, I can't read, greatest possible enlightenment of the subject. Sorry for that slide being so crappy. President Ford has talked many times about believing. Lord Doubting, this guy had some really cool, I saw some interviews with this guy on one of the programs. It might even been a book. I saw it. It was definitely a program. He was interesting. Of course, the flying saucers are real and they're interplanetary. I mean, I don't know how much more direct you could say it, right? Victor Marchetti, former special assistant to the executive director of the CIA. We have indeed been contacted, perhaps even visited by extraterrestrial beings, and the U.S. government, in collusion with the other natural powers of the Earth, in determining to keep this information from the general public. So he's saying it's not just the U.S. government, but it's all across the world, leaders and people with knowledge of this have kind of been in collusion to hide this. Doesn't surprise me. Jimmy Carter, who was the president when I was born. I am convinced UFOs exist because I've seen one. Fair enough. And when you see one, it's not like you can mistake it. You really can't. The great footage that's been released of the Tic Tac is really good. If you look up the video of the Tic Tac UFO, I want to say filmed in 2014, 2016 by pilot David Fraser, something, Commander Fravor, if I'm not mistaken by his name. I saw an interview with him on Joe Rogan. It was quite interesting. He had a good story. Roscoe Hillenkotte, former director of the CIA, Vice Admiral, former director of the CIA. It is time for the truth to be brought out. Behind the scenes, high-ranking Air Force officers are soberly concerned about UFOs, but through official secrecy and ridicule, many citizens are led to believe the unknown flying objects are nonsense. I urge immediate congressional action to reduce the dangers from secrecy about the unidentified flying objects. So again, more than anything, transparency is what we want, right? And if the government had been more transparent and aspects of government entities, UFO, Army, Coast Guard, Navy, CIA, FBI, everybody that's had information, encounters, things like that. There's been a lot of secrecy, and a lot of people are hesitant to come forward because they're worried about their jobs, their reputation. Frank Salisbury, who's a PhD, I must admit that any favorable mention of flying saucers by scientists amounts to extreme hearsay and places the one making the statement in danger of excommunication by the scientific theocracy. Again, scientists even have to be careful, and especially years ago, you can get ostracized from their community. Ben Rich, he's in my notes here too. I don't have him in today's stuff, but this guy goes deep into this whole thing. We'll revisit this name later. We now have the technology to take ET home. In 1955, this was said by the CEO of Lockheed Skunk Works. Lockheed, I'm sorry. I've heard it pronounced both ways. I think it's Lockheed. You can look into that company. They had all kinds of contracts with with the U.S. Coast Guard, Air Force, Army, all kinds of contracts with U.S. government. What's the word I'm looking for? Branches and officials, CIA, FBI, those kind of things. Ben Rich, interesting guy. We'll touch on him some more. I just want to give a little bit of the overview and inspiration and give credit where credit's due. I like some of this research. I watched things and I read things, but I think most of my main takeaways, and main evidence I'm going to use to talk about with you guys comes from these areas. Now, there's definitely more, and I'm going to elaborate and discuss, but where I got information and some of the sources that propelled me to create this presentation, this content, Brad Meltzer's series Decoded, the Area 51 episode is great. A couple of the things I talk about are covered in there. They did a really good job. Check that out if you've never seen it. Highly recommend it. That's probably the thing I'd recommend most out of everything here. There's a YouTube channel or program called The Basement Office. Excellent, especially on the stuff that's been coming out in the recent, 18 months. They've been covering very well, and I've got a lot of my information from that YouTube channel and that program. The story called Extraordinary, the Stan Romanek story. This guy has the most encounters, evidence, and overall experience I've ever seen from anybody dealing with UFOs. Of course, some of it can probably be discounted. Some of it not credible. Some of it you cannot not explain. So he wrote a book that was also made into a documentary. Check it out. And Stephen Greer, very reputable. The Disclosure Project in 2001, which ultimately he took to our government and ultimately got started, and then this became big. And he created I believe it's a book and a movie. I've only seen the movie. I've not read the book. Unacknowledged. Very, very good. Bob Lazar, if you know anything about UFO community and evidence and Area 51 and what goes on there, you probably heard it from an interview with Bob Lazar. This all started in the late 80s. Bob is a great reference, and I still believe him to this day. Bob's story has not changed one bit in 40 years. Everything, a lot of the things he had said 30 years ago and people looked at him crazy have been proven to come true. Element 115, I think, is the most well-known thing that he talked about in the 80s, and then we discovered element 115 in the 2000s. Go figure. Wasn't even on our periodic chart, and no one knew what it was when Bob talked about it. Now we have it. Another thing was a scanner to get into Area 51 or into some of the secured locations. He talked about the scanner he put his hand in, which had a weird shape, and it was in 1989. No one knows what it was. Pictures have now been seen of this exact scanner in high-ranking government buildings to get into restricted areas. The exact thing he talked about. Many more cases, but it's always, it always becomes more credible and more believable when a guy tells you something in the 80s, you're like, yeah, right, man. But then 20, 30 years later, you're like, what he said in the 80s is now fact. It's like, it's here. There's pictures of it. The element exists. Like Bob Lazar's house actually got raided because they believe he had his own stash of element 115. But we'll get much more into these important names and programs that launch my investigation as I go through this. And I'm glad I took my time and dug through some of these back channels because it paid off in terms of irrefutable evidence, in my opinion. So the encounter example, Stan Romanek is the best opinion, again, in terms of close encounter of the first kind, because his amount of sightings is just second to none. Plus, he has some really good video of him encountering UFO in the skies in the daytime, which was really cool. I forget, I want to say he's out in the Colorado area at the time. Could be mistaken, but I believe it's the Pacific Northwest. And although throughout his story he has encounters of each and every variety, I believe he's the best example here due to the sheer volume. Now, I could use him in every freaking example because he has probably been taken. Yes, he's been taken. He has physical evidence, which is the third kind. He has seen the craft, and he has seen the beings. His story's crazy. the calls he gets on his answering machine from some weird robotic voice that calls him Starseed, if I remember right. Starseed. I can just remember this robotic voice leaving him answering machine. Starseed, your mission is so. It was just really weird. A lot of the stuff, images, pictures, video of a alien literally speaking his head in his living room window. All kinds of stuff. His stuff's really, really cool. So check that out for more information. The second kind, I think one of the best examples of this kind is the data collected by former FAA Division Chief John O Callahan. I'm not sure. I don't know if he got interviewed in the Brad Meltzer one or if I saw him on a different thing. But John Callahan, again, his story hasn't changed. His interview about this over the years has been totally the same from day one. Very phenomenal. And I'll go over that account a little. But on November of 1986, while monitoring a Japanese American, I don't know what JAL stands for exactly. I know it's a Japanese airline. And that flight was over the skies of Alaska. And up on the monitor, the radar, an unknown craft roughly 4 times the size of a 747 came into the radar. So just so you guys know, a 747 is like driving a hotel through the sky. It's one of our bigger commercial aircrafts, and it literally has floors on it. You could take an elevator and stairs up. 747s are huge. So for something to be 4 times the size of that on radar, lets you know it's just not a regular commercial aircraft. We don't have commercial aircrafts 4 times the size of a 747. Not that I'm aware of. Now, in 1986, I know we didn't have it. We may have something that I don't know of now. Definitely not then. And for one of the first times in recorded history, they captured approximately 30 minutes of this craft's actions on radar, getting data. So now when I say the story just gets crazier from here, I'll look back in my notes a little bit. I'm going to remember most of this just from watching this. So after he called, I forget which, if he called the president or the FBI or the CIA, he called somebody to be like, hey, man, he's FAA. He might have called the Air Force. I forget exactly who he got in touch with. Long story short, it was believable. He had the radar evidence. He had all kinds of data. And the government, and we've never really had access to this because most of the UFO sightings, especially by our government that actually got captured on radar, either made the equipment malfunction or were off radar within, seconds or a minute tops. Like having 30 minutes of this data, I still don't know if that's ever happened since, but at the time the government was like drooling at the bit. So anyway, he calls this in. I'm almost positive he called the president or tried to reach the president, somebody in the White House, and then they sent people. He said people came from 3 different, he believes it was from 3 different government agencies, CIA, FBI, and one was something much more secretive. I think I know what it is. I'm just drawing a blank on it right this minute. More importantly, basically what these guys did is they came in. These guys were like, I remember him describing them. These guys were like in black suits. He said they were like, one of them looked like a scientist, like big gray Albert Einstein hair. And they were like drooling at the bit to get this data. And basically they came in and said, this never happened. Whoever heard or saw anything, erase it from your memory. This never happened. I have that in quotes because John Callahan made it very short in his interviews to say they came in and said, this never happened. And they confiscated all the data. Little did they know that it took them a little while to get there. You see this, you call the president. John kind of had a hunch this was going to happen. So he actually made duplicates and copies of this data and of these reports and of the charts and of the radar analysis, all the printouts. He made copies. So when they confiscated it, little did they know he still had all that same stuff in his possession, which was smart. I'm very glad he did that because it helped prove his story true and more credible. But just think about it. You are what did I say his position was? Division chief for the FAA. And you see this come on your radar and you're asking the pilot. So he's talking to the pilot too. And the pilot sees it and he's like, I don't know what this is. This thing's huge. It's close to my airspace. What is this thing? You guys seen this on radar? So he was in communication with the pilot. It wasn't just a malfunction. This was saw by, I think it was by the people on the crew as well. I'm sorry, not the crew, but the passengers. I don't know. I believe it was a commercial flight, if I'm not mistaken. But the pilot definitely had communication with John back and forth over the radio, kind of saying what he was seeing it do and vice versa. So again, long story short, he calls it in to the president, they send whoever there, the men in black, so to speak. And, this never happened. We're confiscating all your stuff. Just very amazing. And if you look him up and see some of his interviews, you'll understand how credible the guy is. So the third kind, again, we could use Stan Romanek, but over and over, it's a bit redundant. So I wanted to find some more reputable cases for this one. I went with Richard Doty, who was a special agent for the U.S. Air Force, OSI. I would have to look that back up. It's in my notes. I don't know what OSI stands for off the top of my head. Operating Specialist Investigator, something like that. And he was on the scene in 47 when the famous Roswell crash happened, right? We'll get into Roswell too. That's so widely known, and anybody who's watching this probably has a pretty good understanding of that, so I didn't lump it in right now. We'll talk about that in future episodes as I, talk more about this and go through more of my research and actually put it into slides, or I'm going to find a way to make this more compelling for you guys to watch. I know this isn't great, and YouTube's all about having good production value, and there should be great images, and I'm new to this. I don't have any of that right now. I'm going off knowledge and passion and hoping it's either entertaining or informative. But anyway, he had spoke about seeing bodies of entities with 4 fingers, elongated shape of heads, and he talked about the fingers being lengthy too, long fingers, being removed from the infamous Roswell crash of 47 before they were told, quote, put these in a deep freeze and send them off to Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So everyone's familiar, or a majority of people, I'll never say everyone, but a majority of people are familiar with Area 51, Roswell, all that stuff. And if you haven't done a lot of this research or watched many programs or read many books, you might not know, but Wright-Patterson Air Force Base is, if not as important, right behind Area 51 in terms of where evidence gets sent, where people have been known to see things, and where things are kept very, very secretive from the American public. I'd have to look it up again. I want to say Wright-Patterson is somewhere in Pennsylvania. I believe it's in the east part of the country. So you got, Area 51 out west and Wright-Patterson on the east coast as terms of, secretive bases where things could be held, whether that's bodies, craft, debris, anything. And then a similar account by Lieutenant Colonel Philip Corso of the U.S. Army, who told an account of seeing gray bodies with bigger heads being held and cataloged by high-ranking officials within the U.S. Army. And, of course, he was told to never speak about it. Both of these guys, when you look them back up, very reputable, no reason to make this stuff up, and it probably hurt their careers. Those are the people that I don't believe them more. I think for the general public, they believe them more because they were in the military. They're usually pretty straight shooters, right? Air Force, Army is reputable, respectable, more so than Stan Romanek. When you watch his stuff, people are going to be like, he's some bum with a camera making stuff up. Like, that could be your opinion, whatever. Some of Stan's stuff is overwhelming. I think the best evidence would go back to that second kind that I talked about with Callahan. Stan Romanek was injured to the point in his leg where he was having trouble walking. He was in a cast and walking on crutches, and he had a surgery to repair ligaments or tendons or whatever the damage was. Woke up one morning and couldn't find his crutches anywhere. He got out of bed looking all around for him, and then he realized that he's walking normally. Like, he literally called his doctor. He's like, Doc, I don't need surgery. My leg's fine. And the doctor's like, that's impossible. You need the surgery. Your leg can't be fine. And basically, long story short, they were arguing back and forth. Long story short, he said, come in. He came in, and Stan's ligaments or tendons had been repaired, in a way that no U.S. surgeon could ever do it by the small little dot in his leg. There was no real incision marks, no real surgical marks. Very, very hard to dispute, especially when the doctor who thought Stan was nuts called him in and said, okay, I'm going to look at it. I'm going to prove him he's wrong. We'll do the surgery. He brought him in. He goes, you don't need it anymore. You're fine. So that was a really good example. But he said when he was walking around that morning going crazy, he couldn't find his crutches. He walked outside and found his crutches pretty much charred and burned, along with medicine out of his medicine cabinet. A prescription bottle was over there, melted. It was melted in some way that's not just from fire. It's just really, really odd. You'd have to watch it to get the whole account. But another really good story of evidence that you can't really dispute. I reckon this kind of encounter, right, close encounter, the fourth kind, is probably the most frightening to folks. I say not me, because I'm so intrigued and so, I don't know. I mean, it's easy to say you're unafraid if you're not in front of one, but I honestly believe if one ever landed in front of me, I would walk toward it and not away. A lot of people would run away due to the unknown, being scared, hearing stories of people being taken. And there's lots of people that are curious, that think they're peaceful, and that would go toward it. I'm one of the latter. I would go toward it rather than away. And I totally get it, right? If you don't, I mean, I get it. I feel there are two cases in particular that are very well documented and I think are the most credible in terms of being taken. Betty and Barney Hill, 1961, probably the most famous case with, Betty, the star map she drew after going into hypnosis that we now found out is a whole nother galaxy. We've never had this star map. She drew it out of her head, and then later it had been matched to another galaxy, which was, nobody could draw that. Nobody, not even somebody who has seen it before could draw it. Never mind somebody with no astronomy experience, no history of NASA, no formal education in any of those types of fields. And Barney was just plagued with PTSD after this. His recurring nightmares were crazy. He basically went insane after this account. And when you see the tapes and hear the audio of him going through hypnosis, the screams he lets out in fear is just blood curdling. You can't really make it up. And this was not the couple that would want the attention brought on them. An interracial couple back in the 60s in New Hampshire is where this happened. Now I live close to New Hampshire and I've driven by this. There's a little memorial and it's like a national, site, monument or whatever. This is where the Benny and Barney Hill abduction took place. Also all kinds of things happened. Time elapsed, physical symptoms, marks on them, stains on Betty's clothes of something, some kind of fluid that we still couldn't detect. There was a lot of evidence with that. The Travis Walton 1975 case turned into the movie, which I believe was made in the 80s, could have been late 70s, called Fire in the Sky. Travis's instance was really cool. He was a logger working with a bunch of buddies out in the woods. I want to say in Oregon. You could double check my facts there. I believe it was the Pacific Northwest. They were loggers and basically coming back from their day of out in the forest cutting these trees, and they saw, they were going through a heavily wooded area with just like dirt or even maybe grass roads, that had just cleared to drive through to get to the site where they were going to be, doing their taking down trees, logging, cutting, all that stuff that they do. And they saw a light, in the crossing, and they decided to drive toward it. And when they got to it, they saw a craft that none of them could describe. And Travis got out and started walking toward it and was trying to, I think he was being aggressive, hey, get out of here, maybe even throwing stones at it. I'd have to go back and listen again to the exact account, but this is, pretty accurate. And then basically he just disappeared. He just evaporated, and so did the craft. It was gone. His friends were all looking for him. They came home, they drove back to town. They're obviously, these guys are young, in their 20s, well-built guys, and pretty honest folks. And at first, the 3 or 4 friends got investigated for murdering Travis. And turns out he ends up back just a couple of days later, and somebody finds him, and he has no memory of what happened. He doesn't realize how much time has lapsed. Travis is now a big advocate. He's a speaker on this behalf. He talks to a lot of people. Travis's account, if you go back, and I wouldn't say watch the Hollywood movie. I would go watch a documentary. You get it done in a lot less time and be a lot more accurate. I have watched the film, and there's a lot of stuff embellished, and rightfully so. When you make a film, it's for entertainment. And if you don't have people's, if you don't have them entertained and their attention, you're not going to put butts in the seats when you go to a movie theater, or you put it on to, at the time, videotape, right? A VHS tape. So, Travis Walton's case was really, really interesting. And 100%, I believe both of these cases. I believe plenty more, but I think those two have a lot of witnesses, a lot of, even like the Travis Walton one, you have police reports, you have interviews, you have people that thought he was dead or missing or possibly murdered. And then he shows up a couple of days later, dropped back off, basically shivering, looked dirty, kind of looked like he hadn't, maybe malnourished, right? Like he hadn't really eaten well in a couple of days, and just had no real memory, especially initially. I guess memory started to come to him over time, but right when he got back. But he did have the same story, and everything he remembered was exactly the same as the other people who already told the police the story. He remembers everything up until the craft, right? So their story about leaving work, about seeing the lights in the clearing, about driving up, about him getting out of the truck, all that he remembers. And his story jived with everybody who was at first being investigated for killing him. So very interesting there. And that's all I have for now. That's all I wanted to go over. This is already a long enough episode at about 30 minutes. Hopefully it was interesting, entertaining, or informative, or some of the above, one of the above minimum. I enjoyed doing it for you guys, so I hope you learned something. I hope you, if any of this interests you, dive into some of those, resources and sources that I had mentioned. You'll find a lot more detail, and I just tried to give the quick overview to the best of my recollection and going off my notes. So this will be part one. I will probably take, a couple of weeks to a month to do part two, because I want to get some more research done, and I want to learn a little more about, how to make these, the content and the production value a little better for you guys, and put some good images and stuff on there. So cool. Everybody have a good day, and hit me up in the comments, right? If you have any questions, I would be curious. I don't think this is going to get out to many people because I don't really YouTube, so to speak. I have a few videos and a handful of subscribers, maybe. But out of the people that do see it, I'm just kind of curious what the feedback, like the comments would be if people do decide to comment. Am I nuts for saying I believe in all this stuff? Are these sources? Can you easily explain every one of these? There's always going to be naysayers, but I don't know how you can naysay all of it. And again, I go back to kind of I'll call it my opening statement, if you will, that if one of these is true and accurate, then you can't really rule out any other instances. So I don't know, take that for what it's worth. I just think there's way too many evidence, way too many sightings, way too many people over time. And especially of late, with the uptick in technology and the amount of people video recording, and some of the more, Commander David Fravor, if I pronounce that right, his video was one of the better ones that's, recent in the last, handful of years. Go check that stuff out, and we'll see you next time, guys.